The letter I kept was dated June 8, 2024. One sentence in it said he stayed after closing so a foster girl could leave wearing glasses instead of carrying a promise. I read that line twice at my desk. It turned out to contain the whole case. I want to tell you how we got there. When the file first reached me, it did not look like the kind of case people tell stories about. It looked small. 2 misdemeanor counts, a clinic invoice, a county payment dispute, 1 child, 1 pair of glasses, 1 doctor who made a choice he should not have made. But some cases are not large because of how many pages they take. They are large because of what they reveal. There is always a range at sentencing. People outside court do not always know that. The law sets limits, and inside those limits I have to decide where a person belongs. In this case, I chose the lowest end of what the law allowed. I want to tell you everything I saw that made that the right call, because it was not obvious from the outside, and it should have been. I want you to subscribe before I keep going, not because what I am about to tell you is dramatic, because it is the opposite of dramatic, and those are the stories that need the most people to hear them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Then let me continue. The defendant was Dr. Elias Mercer, 46 years old, an eye doctor who had run the same clinic on East Long Street for almost 15 years. When he came into my courtroom, he was wearing a navy suit that had been pressed carefully but not recently, and he kept touching the bridge of his own glasses as if they had become too heavy. He did not look toward the gallery to see who had come to support him. He looked once toward the boy at the other table, then sat down and folded his hands. That mattered to me, not because it excused anything. It did not. But I have sat through enough sentencings to know the difference between a person checking for sympathy and a person checking whether the harm they caused has a face. He knew exactly where to look. He also knew why it was hard to do it. The victim was Malik Green, 12 years old in foster care and smaller than I expected when he first stood beside counsel table. He wore silver frames with blue tape around one arm, and from the bench I could see him pushing them up every few minutes with the side of his finger. He sat straight, but not in the stiff way children sit when adults tell them to behave. He sat straight the way children sit when they already know rooms like that can change their lives. What stayed with me about Malik was not anger. It was clarity. When he finally spoke, he did not ask me to punish Dr. Mercer as hard as I could. He said, "I just want kids like me to get their glasses when they're told to come get them." That was not a child trying to sound wise. That was a child who had learned earlier than he should have that adults often mistake punishment for repair. I listened closely after that. His foster mother, Renee Carter, came with him. She had driven 32 miles that morning, parked 3 blocks away to save money, and carried a folder that had every school note, clinic receipt, and county email in date order. She did not whisper in Malik's ear. She did not coach him. She kept her hands around a paper cup and watched the room with the steady face of a woman who had spent a long time being the calmest adult available. Subscribe before I keep going. I made a choice in this case that I want to explain fully. Subscribe now, because the reason I made it is coming, and I want you to be here for the whole explanation. The incident happened on Tuesday, September 12, 2023 at 4:17 p.m. at Mercer Family Vision, 1174 East Long Street, Columbus, Ohio. Malik had already been examined. His prescription had already been filled. A nonprofit called Clear Steps Vision Fund had already covered the cost of the glasses because the county approval for foster care cases was slow and everyone involved knew Malik needed them for school. The clinic called the day before and said the glasses were ready. Renee brought him in after school to pick them up. The receptionist put the glasses on the counter. Then a billing issue appeared on the office screen. One county exam code had not yet cleared. Dr. Mercer came out from the back, looked at the screen, looked at the chart, and took the glasses off the counter. Renee offered to sign anything. She offered to pay if the county somehow refused later. Malik said he had a reading quiz the next morning. Dr. Mercer still put the glasses in a drawer behind the desk. He said, "I can't release them without county clearance." That quote mattered because it was true. He said it. The camera footage from the front desk had no audio, but every witness gave the same line, and his own chart note entered at 4:19 p.m. said, "Hold release pending county clearance." The defense later argued that he was afraid of violating billing rules after recent losses in his practice. The problem for him was that the charity payment had already covered the glasses. The county code was tied to the exam, not the frame sitting in that drawer. At 5:06 p.m., after leaving the clinic without the new glasses, Malik misread the number on an approaching bus near Long and Garfield and stepped off the curb too early. He fell, sprained his left wrist, and scratched the lens of the taped pair he was still wearing. The school records showed he missed his quiz the next day and was pulled from reading group for several days because of headaches and eye strain. Harm does not need to be large to be lasting. Sometimes it is enough that a child learns once again that need does not guarantee care. Before the hearing, what crossed my desk was ordinary in the way legal files often are: billing printouts, county emails, a paid charity invoice dated August 31, 2023, the lens order completed September 8th, an internal office note entered by Dr. Mercer, and one thing that many people would have missed if they were only scanning: the clinic's own policy manual said the doctor may release glasses in a charity-funded case before final insurance reconciliation if delay would burden the patient. May, not must. May. That single word told me the policy had not forced him to do this. He had discretion. He used it in the wrong direction. Later, that mattered to me because the law also gave me discretion, and I intended to use mine in the right direction if the evidence supported it. There is a procedural tool I was glad to have in this case. I could suspend most of the jail time, order restitution, and build very specific probation terms tied to the harm. At a kitchen table, I would explain it this way. I was not limited to deciding how much pain to hand back. I was allowed to design structure. If the facts showed me a way to protect the public and repair something real at the same time, I could do that. From the bench, entrances tell their own truth. Dr. Mercer entered through the side door with counsel, but when he saw Malik seated at the other table, he slowed just enough for me to notice. Not enough for the room. Enough for me. Malik came through the main doors with Renee and his caseworker, and before he sat down, he counted the empty chairs in the first row with his eyes. Children in care are always learning exits, distances, and who belongs to whom. They should not have to be good at that. Many of them are. The first turn in the case came from a moment that would never appear in a transcript as important. During a short pause, Malik stood too quickly, and his taped glasses slipped off onto the floor. Before anyone else moved, Dr. Mercer was half out of his chair. Then he stopped himself and sat back down. He knew he could not cross that room. He also knew, instantly, what a scratched lens means to a child who can barely see. I did not build my sentence on that. I am too careful for that. But I did let it change the way I read the rest of the evidence. Because then Maria Alvarez testified. She had worked as Dr. Mercer's technician for 6 years. She did not come to save him. In fact, she had quit 3 months before the incident. She said he always noticed first when a child was pretending they could see better than they could. I wrote that down because it told me something the billing records could not. It told me that what happened on September 12th was not ignorance. It was a failure of nerve. Maria also said his clinic had been under pressure for months. A bad equipment loan, rising rent, insurance delays, staff cuts. Then she said the most useful thing of all. She said, he started letting fear make medical choices. That was not dramatic language. It was accurate language. Accurate language helps me. I am still thinking about what this case taught me. Subscribe. Because before this video ends, I am going to try to say it out loud, and I want you to be here when I do. Subscribe now. From there, the evidence deepened instead of changing direction. The state proved the offense cleanly. The glasses had been paid for. The child was told to come get them. The doctor had authority to release them. He refused anyway. That part was settled. What was not settled was the harder question. Was this man now only a risk, or was he also still useful in the exact place where he had failed? The second turn came after lunch in a scuffed banker's box. Defense counsel admitted old records from a mobile vision program Dr. Mercer had volunteered with from 2018 through 2022. There were 73 patient cards, many marked child in care or school referral, all no charge. There were repair logs, donated frames, Saturday visits to group homes, and handwritten notes about emergency adjustments before state testing weeks. It was not polished. It was old paper, bent corners, coffee rings. That box did not erase the offense. I would not let it. But it answered the question I had been waiting to answer. Could he do something real, specific, and supervised for the same population he had harmed? The records said yes, not because they were emotional, because they were factual. When the clerk lifted the stack, Renee stopped turning her cold coffee cup in her hands. She looked at the papers, then at Dr. Mercer. And for the first time that morning, I saw something other than anger on her face. Not forgiveness, not softness, consideration. The prosecutor, to her credit, met the evidence honestly. She said a person can do years of good and still commit a charged act. That is true. Then she said, the question is whether his skill makes him more accountable. That was exactly right. The room sharpened after that. The defense did one smart thing and one weak thing. The smart thing was refusing to pretend this had all been a misunderstanding. Counsel said plainly that Dr. Mercer had confused financial stress with ethical judgment and let a child absorb the cost. I respected that. The weak thing was trying for a few minutes to make stress sound like mitigation by itself. It was not. Adult pressure does not become a child's burden just because the adult is tired. Then Dr. Mercer testified. He said, I was keeping the doors open 1 week at a time. That told me something true about his circumstances. Later, he said, I made a child pay for a fight between systems that had nothing to do with him. That told me his accountability was not borrowed from his lawyer. It sounded like his own sentence. Then counsel asked what he would have done if Malik had been his own son. He said, if he had been my son, I would have carried those glasses to the car. That was the moment I knew what I was going to do. I wrote it down, not because I needed to remember it, because I wanted to. Subscribe before I continue. I have been building to something in this story, and it is not where you might think it is going. Subscribe and let me get there. His answer brought back a scene from my own life. I was 9. My brother had bent his glasses climbing a fence behind our apartment building. My mother set a kettle on the stove, held the frame arm in steam, and straightened it with a dish towel under the yellow kitchen light so he could get through the week until payday. The radiator hissed. A spoon knocked once against a mug. No one made a speech. We just needed him to see. I did not tell that memory in court. I am placing it here because it came into the room with me when he answered. Some memories do not cloud judgment. They tell you when a fact has reached the human center of a case. By the time arguments ended, I had already decided guilt. The law allowed up to 180 days in jail, a $1,000 fine on each count, restitution, and probation. The easiest thing for me would have been to announce a clean block of custody, call it stern, and move on. People rarely criticize severity in the moment. Precision is harder. Precision must be explained. Before I spoke, the room held a certain kind of attention. Malik had both hands tucked under the table. Renee sat very still. Dr. Mercer did not look up again. I had made this decision carefully. I had made it knowing that mercy, to mean anything, has to be precise. Vague mercy is just hope. Precise mercy is a plan. I had a plan. Subscribe, because if this case surprised me, and it did more than once, I think what comes next will do the same for you. Subscribe and stay with it. I sentenced Dr. Mercer to 180 days, with 170 suspended, and ordered 10 days in county work release. I chose that because the offense needed a real mark, not a symbolic one. He had to feel that a line had been crossed. But I was not willing to remove him so completely that the one skill most needed for repair sat unused. I ordered restitution of $246 directly to Renee Carter for bus fare, the wrist brace, the emergency eye visit, and replacement temporary lenses. Actual people had carried actual costs because of his choice. I wanted that named. I also ordered $200 to Clear Steps Vision Fund. earmarked for backup glasses for children in foster care in Franklin County. The harm began with a child being made to wait for sight. The money needed to move toward sight. I ordered 240 hours of restorative service over 12 months through Bright Path Foster Resource Center and the County Mobile Vision Bus, not generic service, not labor detached from the harm. Eye exams, fittings, frame repairs, lens checks, and urgent replacement appointments for children in care with no billing gate and no refusal for missing paperwork. I designed it that way because accountability should stand as close to the injury as truth will allow. I also ordered 18 months of supervised probation with structure tied to what the evidence had shown me, 24 hours of ethics training on access to care, 16 hours of trauma-informed care for children in foster placement, monthly counseling for burnout and professional boundary failure, quarterly compliance letters signed by probation and Bright Path. I did not want good intentions reported to me. I wanted verified effort. And there was one more thing. Twice each month for 1 year, he had to attend Bright Path foster parent support night after clinic hours and stay until the folding tables were put away, adjust frames, replace nose pads, answer questions, listen. I required that because he had become too narrow. I wanted his skill returned to the community in a way that would keep him among people who knew exactly what delay costs a child. I gave him one benchmark for early completion. If by August 14, 2024, he had finished all 240 service hours, paid every dollar, completed training and counseling, and received written certification that he had not turned away a single referred foster child for lack of payment or incomplete paperwork, I would consider reducing probation by 6 months. That was the door inside the sentence. He could choose whether to walk toward it. Then I spoke to him directly. I said, "You withheld glasses from a child after they had already been paid for. You did it knowing he needed them for school and for basic safety. That cost Malik pain, school time, and one more lesson that adults with authority may decide he can wait." I let that stay in the room. Then I said, "These charges contain what you did. They do not contain all of who you are. I believe you can still become useful in the exact place where you failed." That was me naming my belief in him plainly. I do not do that lightly. I ended this way. I said, "Do not ever make another child carry the weight of problems that belong to grown people." The first reaction I noticed was Malik's. He took off his taped glasses, cleaned both lenses with the hem of his shirt, and put them back on. Then Renee laid one hand on the table beside him and left it there. That was all. I am about to tell you what happened after the sentence, whether this person did what I believed they would do. Subscribe so you are here for that part. It is the part I care about most. As the courtroom emptied, Dr. Mercer did not rush for the side door. He waited until Malik and Renee were standing, kept a respectful distance, and said, "Ms. Carter, I will do every hour." He said it once. Renee nodded once. Before I stood, I capped my pen and placed it in the groove on the bench. It felt small. It also felt complete. What happened after is not a broad success story in my mind. It is one date and one thing. On June 8, 2024, Bright Path sent a compliance letter to probation with a copy to my chambers because I had ordered review updates. The director wrote that Dr. Mercer had already completed 148 hours and had stayed after closing that Saturday so a foster girl could leave wearing glasses instead of carrying a promise. That was the line from the letter. It was enough. There was another date. On August 14, 2024, at the review hearing, Malik came in wearing dark blue frames that fit his face. When I asked how school was going, he said, "I can read from the back now." That was his second quote, and I have carried it since. It did not sound large, it was. No appeal was filed. I noted the deadline when it passed. In this case, that meant something to me. It meant the sentence had been understood for what it was. Not indulgence, not performance, not confusion about harm. Just a careful answer to a specific wrong. What I came to believe because of this case is simple. Mercy that asks nothing is only relief. Mercy that asks the right things can protect, repair, and test a person at the same time. It cost me more to do that than it would have cost me to choose the blunt answer. The blunt answer is easier to explain in a hallway. The careful answer must survive thought. If you have been in the defendant's position, if you have caused real harm and do not know whether there is any path forward, let me tell you one thing I look for from the bench. I look for accurate self-description, not polished regret, not borrowed language. The moment when a person says exactly what they did and stops trying to spread the weight around. If you can do that and then match your conduct to those words, judges notice, I notice. That is not permission, it is instruction. Name it clearly, repay what can be repaid. Accept terms that fit the truth, not terms that flatter you. You do not control the outcome. You do help create the record I must read. If you have been in the victim's position, and if anyone has ever asked you to consider mercy for the person who hurt you, I am not going to tell you what to want. I can only say what I have witnessed. When victims chose mercy in cases where mercy had been earned, it often seemed to return some authorship to them over time, not because the harm vanished, because it did not get the final word all by itself. And if mercy was not yours to give, I respect that too. Malik did not owe anyone grace. Renee did not owe anyone balance. The fact that each of them brought clarity into that room changed what became possible there. He met the benchmark. By August 14, 2024, the hours were done, the money was paid, the training was complete, and Bright Path certified 0 denials. I reduced probation by 6 months exactly as I had said I would. Not because promises move me, because follow-through does. Later that fall, I learned one more thing through probation. He had started keeping a drawer of repaired children's frames and soft cases at Bright Path, so no foster child would leave empty-handed if something broke on a school day. No one asked him to do that. It did not erase September 12, 2023. It sat beside it. He stayed after closing so a foster girl could leave wearing glasses instead of carrying a promise. That is why I told you this story. If you want to hear the others, and there are others, subscribe. That is all I am asking. Subscribe and stay. And if you leave a comment, leave it like you are speaking in a room where people understand that justice and humanity are not opposites.